Part 8. Justice and Legacy. The trial began 11 months after Ryan first heard those desperate words in the factory basement. The courthouse was packed every day with reporters, art historians, victims of art theft, and people who simply wanted to see justice served. Richard Hartley sat at the defense table, surrounded by 5 expensive lawyers. At 85 years old, he looked frail, but his eyes were still sharp and calculating. His legal team had tried every trick to delay or dismiss the case, but District Attorney Catherine Price had outmaneuvered them at every turn. Ryan sat in the courtroom each day, watching as the case he'd built was presented to the jury. Agent Lynn testified about the financial evidence. Dr. Wells explained the significance of the stolen artworks. Helen Brightman, now a surprise star witness, described the conspiracy in detail. But the most powerful moment came when Elena took the stand. She was nervous. Ryan could see her hands shaking as she was sworn in. But when she began to speak about her grandmother, her voice grew stronger. Rosa Rodriguez was the most honest person I ever knew, Elena said, looking directly at the jury. She worked 2 jobs to support her family. She cleaned offices and factories, and she never complained. But when she saw something wrong, she couldn't stay silent. Elena described finding her grandmother's journal, following the map to the hidden room and discovering the truth that Rosa had protected for so long. My grandmother lived in fear for 40 years, Elena continued. She received threats, she lost her job. She was called a liar and a thief by powerful men who were the real criminals. But she never gave up. She hid that painting not to steal it, but to save it. She documented everything because she believed that someday the truth would matter. The defense attorney tried to paint Elena as someone seeking attention or money, but Elena remained calm. "I don't want money," she said simply. "I want people to know that my grandmother was brave. I want people to understand that speaking truth to power isn't easy, but it's necessary. And I want that painting to go back where it belongs, in a museum where everyone can see it and appreciate the artist who created it." The prosecution's case was overwhelming. The video footage from before the heist showed Hartley removing paintings from the museum. Financial records showed unexplained income and suspicious transactions. Multiple witnesses described the conspiracy. And Rosa's journal, authenticated by handwriting experts and corroborated by other evidence, told the complete story. The defense argued that Hartley was being persecuted for actions that were common in the art world at the time. They claimed the evidence was too old to be reliable. They suggested Rosa had stolen the painting and fabricated evidence to justify her theft. But the jury wasn't buying it. After 3 weeks of testimony and 2 days of deliberation, the verdict came back. Guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others cried. Hartley sat motionless, his face pale. His lawyers immediately announced they would appeal. Outside the courthouse, Ryan stood beside Elena as District Attorney Price addressed the media. "Today, justice was served," Price said, "not just for the Westfield Museum, but for Rosa Rodriguez, a woman who risked everything to protect the truth. This verdict sends a message that no one is above the law. Not museum directors, not board members, not senators. Power and wealth cannot erase crimes or silence victims." A reporter shouted a question. "What about the other board members who were involved?" 3 have already pleaded guilty and are cooperating with ongoing investigations. 1 passed away before charges could be filed. As for Senator Westbrook, federal prosecutors are reviewing his case separately. Another reporter called out, "What will happen to the Castellano painting?" Dr. Wells, standing nearby, answered that question. "The painting has been authenticated and will be returned to the Westfield Museum. We're planning a special exhibition called Voices in the Shadows, Women Artists Reclaimed. It will feature the Castellano painting alongside works by other female artists whose contributions were overlooked or suppressed, and the exhibition will honor Rosa Rodriguez for her courage in protecting these important pieces of our cultural heritage." Elena squeezed Ryan's hand. "She did it," Elena whispered. "My grandmother actually did it." "You both did it," Ryan replied. The sentencing hearing took place 6 weeks later. Hartley's lawyers argued for leniency based on his age and health. They claimed he'd suffered enough through the public humiliation of the trial. But Judge Rebecca Martinez wasn't sympathetic. "Mr. Hartley, you used your position of trust to steal from the institution you were supposed to protect," the judge said. "You destroyed the career of a woman who tried to expose your crimes. You threatened witnesses. You staged a robbery to cover up your theft. And when faced with justice, you showed no remorse, only defiance." She sentenced him to 8 years in federal prison, with the possibility of parole after 5. Given his age, it was likely he would die in prison. As Hartley was led away, Ryan felt a complex mix of emotions. He'd wanted justice, and justice had been served. But there was no satisfaction in seeing an old man face his final years behind bars. There was only the sad recognition that if Hartley had chosen differently 40 years ago, none of this would have been necessary. The case had ripple effects across the art world. Museums everywhere began reviewing their collections more carefully. Several other cases of art theft and fraud from the 1980s and 90s were reopened. The discussion about how women artists had been systematically undervalued became a major topic in art circles. 3 months after the trial, the Westfield Museum held the opening night of Voices in the Shadows. The gallery was packed with people who'd come to see not just the Castellano painting, but the story behind it. Ryan attended with Elena. They stood in front of the painting, the same painting he'd first seen in that dark factory room, the painting that had started everything. Summer Garden showed a woman sitting under an apple tree reading a book. The colors were vibrant even after 100 years. The woman's face was peaceful, content. She looked like someone who had found a quiet moment of joy in a complicated world. Next to the painting was a display case containing Rosa's journal, open to a page where she'd written, "Art is not just beauty, it is truth, it is memory. It is the voice of those who came before us, speaking to those who come after. When we protect art, we protect our shared humanity." Below the journal was a photograph of Rosa, a small woman with kind eyes and strong hands wearing her factory uniform. The plaque read, "Rosa Rodriguez, 1931-2024, Guardian of Truth." Elena stared at her grandmother's photograph for a long time. She never got to see this, she finally said. She never knew that people would honor her this way. Maybe she did know, Ryan suggested. Maybe that's why she left you the map. She trusted you to finish the story. Dr. Wells joined them, smiling. The response to this exhibition has been incredible. We've had visitors from around the world. Other museums are planning similar exhibitions about recovered and reclaimed art. Rosa's story is inspiring people. That's what she would have wanted, Elena said. Not fame for herself, but attention for the art and the artists who created it. The evening concluded with a ceremony. Elena had worked with the museum to establish the Rosa Rodriguez Foundation for Art Recovery and Preservation. The foundation would help fund efforts to locate stolen art, authenticate works by undervalued artists, and provide legal support for people fighting art fraud. My grandmother couldn't fight the powerful people who tried to silence her, Elena said in her speech. But she found another way to fight, by protecting the truth until someone else could speak it. This foundation will help others do the same. It will give voice to the voiceless and power to the powerless. As the crowd applauded, Ryan thought about how far they'd come from that desperate night in the factory. A woman's gasping plea for help had led to a national conversation about justice, about the value of art, about the courage it takes to stand against corruption. Later, Ryan and Elena stood outside the museum, looking up at the building lit against the night sky. "What will you do now?" Ryan asked. "Keep painting," Elena said. "Keep telling stories. My grandmother's story, but also stories of other people whose voices have been lost or ignored. What about you?" "Back to work. There are always more cases, more people who need help." They were quiet for a moment. Then Elena said, "Detective, can I tell you something my grandmother wrote in one of her last letters to me?" "Of course." She wrote, "I am an old woman who spent her life cleaning other people's messes. History will not remember my name, but perhaps that is okay. Perhaps it is enough to know that I did what I could with what I had. I protected something beautiful. I told the truth, even when the truth could only be whispered in secret pages, And I trusted that someday someone would care enough to finish what I started. That is not a small thing, that is everything. Ryan felt tears in his eyes. She was wrong about one thing. What's that? History will remember her name. Because of you. Because of everyone who fought to bring the truth to light. Rosa Rodriguez will be remembered not as a cleaning lady, but as a hero. Elena smiled. She'd probably laugh at being called a hero. She'd say she was just doing what anyone should do, standing up for what's right. Maybe that's what makes someone a hero. Part 1. The emergency call detective Ryan Cooper hated getting calls at 2:47 in the morning. Nothing good ever happened at that hour. But when his phone buzzed on the nightstand, he knew he had no choice but to answer. Cooper here, he mumbled, still half asleep. Detective, this is Officer Jenkins from the East Precinct. We need you at the old Morrison textile factory. We've got a situation. Ryan sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes. The Morrison factory had been abandoned for nearly 15 years. Nobody went there anymore except for teenagers looking for trouble, or homeless folks seeking shelter from the cold. What kind of situation? Ryan asked, already reaching for his clothes. Security guard called it in. Says he heard someone screaming for help. A woman, he thinks. But here's the weird part. The sound is coming from inside the building, from somewhere deep in the basement. 20 minutes later, Ryan pulled up to the factory. The building looked even creepier at night, with its broken windows and rusted metal siding. His headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and overgrown weeds. Officer Jenkins was waiting by the entrance with an older man who looked absolutely terrified. The man's hands were shaking as he held a flashlight. This is George Miller, Jenkins said. He's the security guard who made the call. Ryan shook George's hand. Tell me exactly what happened. George took a deep breath. I do my rounds every night, same time, same route. Been doing it for 3 years now. Never had any problems. But tonight around 2:30 I heard something different. At first I thought maybe it was the wind or some animal. But then I heard it again, clearer this time, a voice. A woman's voice. What did she say? Ryan asked. George's face went pale. She said, please, I can't breathe. Over and over. I tried to find where the sound was coming from, but it was like it was echoing through the whole building. Finally traced it to the basement level. But detective, I'm not going down there alone. That place gives me the creeps even in daylight. Ryan nodded. All right, let's go check it out. Jenkins, you're with me. George, you stay here and keep the entrance clear. The inside of the factory was pitch black except for their flashlights. The beam of light revealed old machinery covered in dust, broken conveyor belts, and piles of rotting fabric. The smell was terrible, a mixture of mold, rust, and something else Ryan couldn't quite identify. They made their way to the stairwell leading down to the basement. Each step creaked under their weight, and Ryan had to test each one before putting his full weight on it. Some of the stairs were completely rotted through. This place should have been demolished years ago, Jenkins whispered. It's a death trap. When they reached the basement, Ryan stopped and listened. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, faint and weak, he heard it. Please, help me. I can't breathe. The voice was real. And it was close. Ryan's heart started pounding. Ma'am, can you hear me? Where are you? Keep talking so we can find you. There was a pause, then the voice came again, slightly stronger this time. Behind the wall. Can't breathe. Ryan swept his flashlight across the basement. The walls were covered with old industrial cloth tarps, hanging from hooks and draped over what looked like storage areas. He moved closer, pulling aside the heavy fabric. Over here, he called to Jenkins. Help me with this. Together, they started tearing down the tarps. Dust flew everywhere, making them cough. Layer after layer of thick cloth came down, revealing brick walls, old pipes, and more darkness. Then Ryan's flashlight caught something different. Behind one particularly large tarp, there was a gap in the wall, not damaged, but a doorway. Someone had deliberately covered it up. I found something, Ryan said, his voice tight with urgency. He ripped away the remaining cloth, revealing a wooden door painted the same color as the brick wall. It was designed to be invisible. The voice came again, weaker now. Please, hurry. Ryan tried the door handle, locked. He stepped back and kicked it hard once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th kick, the old wood splintered and gave way. The smell that came out was overwhelming. Stale air, human waste, and fear. Ryan covered his nose and mouth with his sleeve and shone his light inside. The room was small, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, and there in the corner was a woman. She was curled up on the floor, barely conscious, her clothes dirty and torn. She looked up at the light, and Ryan saw her eyes wide with hope and terror. "We've got her," Ryan called out. "Jenkins, call for an ambulance now." He rushed to the woman's side, kneeling beside her. "You're okay now. We're here to help. Can you tell me your name?" The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Ryan grabbed a water bottle from his belt and carefully helped her take a sip. "Elena," she finally whispered. "My name is Elena Rodriguez." Ryan's mind raced. Elena Rodriguez. That name was familiar. Then it hit him. She was the missing person case from 3 weeks ago. The artist who disappeared without a trace. Everyone thought she'd left town or worse. "Elena, stay with me. Help is coming. Can you move?" She shook her head weakly. "My legs. Too weak. Been here so long." As Ryan waited for the paramedics, he looked around the room with his flashlight. This wasn't just any room. Someone had been using it. There were items scattered around. Old photographs spread across the floor. A leather journal with yellowed pages. Some bottles of water and what looked like protein bars. Most of them empty. But what really caught his attention was something in the far corner, partially covered by a piece of velvet cloth. Ryan moved closer and carefully lifted the fabric. His breath caught in his throat. It was a painting. Even in the dim light of his flashlight, Ryan could see it was old and valuable. The frame was ornate, gilded with gold that had tarnished over the years. The painting itself showed a garden scene with a woman in 1920s clothing sitting beneath a tree. There was something about it that seemed familiar, but Ryan couldn't place it. He'd seen this before or something like it. "The painting," Elena whispered behind him. "You found it?" "Had to protect it. Couldn't let them destroy it." Ryan turned back to her, confused. "Elena, what are you talking about? Who locked you in here?" But Elena's eyes were closing. The paramedics burst into the room and Ryan had to step back to let them work. As they loaded Elena onto a stretcher and carried her out, Ryan stood alone in that hidden room, staring at the painting. His detective instincts were screaming that this was bigger than a simple missing person case. He called for the crime scene unit and carefully documented everything in the room. The photographs, the journal, the painting, all of it was evidence. But evidence of what? As dawn began to break outside, Ryan finally emerged from the factory. George was still there, waiting anxiously. "Is she okay?" the old guard asked. "She will be," Ryan said. "Thanks to you. If you hadn't called this in..." George nodded, looking relieved. "Detective, do you think someone locked her in there?" Ryan looked back at the factory, thinking about that hidden room, the painting, and Elena's cryptic words. "I don't know yet, George, but something tells me this is just the beginning." Part 2. The Discovery. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. Elena Rodriguez lay in the bed, looking much better than she had just 8 hours ago. The doctor said she was severely dehydrated and malnourished, but she would make a full recovery. Ryan sat in the chair beside her bed, a notebook in his lap, waiting for her to wake up. When her eyes finally fluttered open, it took her a moment to realize where she was. Panic flashed across her face. "It's okay, Elena. You're safe. You're at Memorial Hospital," Ryan said gently. Elena relaxed slightly, but her eyes were still alert, worried. "The painting. Did you secure it? Is it safe?" Ryan leaned forward. "Yes, it's locked up in evidence. But Elena, I need you to tell me what happened. The whole story. Start from the beginning." Elena took a sip of water from the cup on her bedside table. Her hands were still shaking slightly. "How much do you know about the Morrison factory?" "Just that it's been abandoned for years. Used to be a major textile manufacturer back in the day." Elena nodded. "My grandmother worked there. Her name was Rosa Rodriguez. She spent 40 years of her life in that factory, working the machines, making fabric. But that's not the important part." She paused, gathering her thoughts. Ryan waited patiently. "6 months ago, my grandmother passed away. She was 93 years old, sharp as a tack right up until the end. Before she died, she gave me a box. Inside was a letter, some old photographs, and a map." "A map of the factory?" Ryan asked. Yes, but not just any map. It showed places in the factory that weren't in the original blueprints. Secret rooms, hidden passages. My grandmother's letter said I needed to right an old wrong, and that everything I needed to know was in that hidden room. Ryan wrote this down. Did your grandmother explain what this old wrong was? Elena shook her head. Not directly, but she mentioned the year 1987 several times. She said that was when everything went bad, when good people had to make difficult choices. So you went looking for this room? I had to, Elena said, her voice becoming more passionate. My grandmother was the most honest person I ever knew. If she said something needed to be done, it needed to be done. I spent weeks studying that map, trying to match it to the current layout of the factory. Finally, 3 weeks ago, I found the entrance to the hidden area. And you went in alone? Didn't tell anyone where you were going? Elena looked down at her hands. I know it sounds stupid now, but I thought I'd just be gone for a few hours. I'd take some pictures, grab whatever evidence was there, and leave. I had no idea what I was walking into. Tell me what you found. Elena's eyes grew distant, remembering. The room was exactly where the map said it would be. There was a hidden door behind all those tarps. When I first opened it, I thought maybe the room would be empty, that whatever my grandmother wanted me to find would be gone after all these years. But it wasn't empty. No. It was like walking into a time capsule from 1987. There were newspapers from that year, coffee cups that still had dried coffee in them, and boxes of documents. But the most important thing was the painting. Ryan pulled out his phone and showed her a photo he'd taken at the scene. This painting? Elena's face lit up. Yes, that's it. Do you know what that is, detective? I'm hoping you'll tell me. That painting is by Maria Castellano, one of the most talented artists of the 1920s. She was brilliant, but because she was a woman, her work was overlooked for decades. This particular painting was part of a collection at the Westfield Museum. Ryan's eyes widened. The Westfield Museum heist, that was 1987, Elena finished. Exactly. 12 paintings were stolen in that robbery. Over the years, 11 of them were recovered. But one remained missing. This one. The pieces were starting to come together in Ryan's mind. And your grandmother knew where it was all along. She didn't steal it, if that's what you're thinking, Elena said quickly. My grandmother wasn't a thief. She was trying to protect it. Protect it from what? Elena reached for a bag on the table beside her bed. A nurse had brought her personal belongings, a backpack she'd had with her in that room. She pulled out a leather journal, water-stained and old. This was my grandmother's journal. She kept it hidden in that room. I found it on the second day I was trapped there. It explained everything. Ryan took the journal carefully. The pages were yellowed and fragile. He opened it to a random page and saw neat handwriting in Spanish and English. Can I keep this for now? He asked. Yes, but please take care of it. It's all I have left of her story. Elena's voice broke slightly. Detective, you need to understand. My grandmother was scared. She witnessed something terrible, and she spent the rest of her life protecting this painting because she knew if it fell into the wrong hands, it would be lost forever. Who was she protecting it from? That's what you need to read the journal to understand. But I'll give you the short version. The museum's director back in 1987 was a man named Richard Hartley. On the surface, he seemed like a respectable art lover. But my grandmother discovered he was selling paintings from the museum's collection and replacing them with forgeries. Ryan whistled low. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation. It's the truth. My grandmother had proof. She found invoices, correspondence, everything. Hartley was specifically targeting works by women artists because he thought no one would notice or care if they went missing. So the heist was staged by Hartley himself to cover up his crimes. He reported 12 paintings stolen, but actually he'd been stealing from the museum for years. The heist was just a way to make it official, to claim insurance money and hide his tracks. Ryan's mind was racing. And your grandmother took this painting to keep it safe. She planned to expose him, but Hartley was powerful. He had connections everywhere. Police, politicians, wealthy collectors. My grandmother was just a factory worker. Who would believe her? So she hid the painting and waited, hoping that someday someone would be able to bring the truth to light. Why not just turn it over to the police back then? Elena smiled sadly, because she didn't know who to trust. For all she knew, the police investigating the heist were in Hartley's pocket. So she created that hidden room in the factory where she worked, and she kept the evidence safe. And then she gave you the map. Years later, yes, she waited until she knew Hartley was old and his power was fading. She waited until I was old enough and strong enough to finish what she started. Ryan closed the journal. Elena, why did you stay in that room for 3 weeks? What happened? Elena's expression darkened. The door. There was a mechanism, an old lock that required a specific combination to open from the inside. I thought I could figure it out, but the more I tried, the worse it got. Eventually, the mechanism jammed completely. I was trapped. Didn't you have your phone? No signal down there. The basement walls are too thick. I tried everything, banging on the walls, screaming, looking for another way out. Nothing worked. I rationed the food and water I found in the room, hoping someone would eventually hear me. The security guard finally did. Thank God for George, Elena said. I'd almost given up. Another day or two and... She didn't finish the sentence. Ryan stood up. You need to rest now. But Elena, I need to investigate this further. If what you're saying is true, if Richard Hartley really did stage that heist, there are going to be a lot of powerful people who don't want this story coming out. Elena grabbed his wrist. Detective, please. My grandmother spent her whole life protecting that painting. Don't let her sacrifice be for nothing. The truth needs to come out. Ryan looked at the determination in her eyes and nodded. I promise you, Elena, I'll get to the bottom of this. As he left the hospital room, Ryan felt the weight of the journal in his hands. He had a feeling this case was about to get a lot more complicated. And somewhere out there, people who thought their secrets were buried 38 years ago were about to get a very unwelcome surprise. Part 4. The stolen legacy. Ryan spent the next week buried in research. His desk at the precinct had become a museum of its own. Stacks of files, old photographs, printouts of newspaper articles from the 1980s. His colleagues joked that he'd built a paper fortress, but Ryan barely noticed. He was too focused on unraveling a 38-year-old mystery. The first breakthrough came when he contacted the Westfield Museum's current director, Dr. Patricia Wells. She was a woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a professional bun and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. Detective Cooper, I have to admit, when you called about the 1987 heist, I was surprised, she said, sitting across from him in her office. That case has been closed for decades. I'm not so sure it should have been, Ryan replied. He laid out several documents on her desk. Dr. Wells, what can you tell me about Richard Hartley? Her expression darkened immediately. Hartley. That man was director here from 1979 to 1994. He retired as a celebrated figure in the art world. Personally, I always thought there was something off about him, but I was just a junior curator back then. Nobody listened to me. What made you suspicious? Little things. The way certain paintings would disappear for a restoration and come back looking slightly different. Records that didn't quite match up. But Hartley had powerful friends. Questioning him was career-ending. Ryan leaned forward. Dr. Wells, I have evidence that Hartley was systematically stealing from this museum, not just during the 1987 heist, but for years before and after. She didn't look surprised. I wondered if someone would eventually figure it out. What kind of evidence? Ryan explained Rosa's journal, the photographs, the documentation. As he talked, Dr. Wells's expression shifted from concern to anger. That explains so much, she said when he finished. Do you know what bothered me most about Hartley's tenure? The way he treated art by women. During his time as director, at least 20 works by female artists were removed from public display. He claimed they were being preserved or studied, but many of them never came back. Can you give me specific examples? Dr. Wells pulled up her computer. I've been digitizing our old records. Give me a moment. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Here, in 1983, 3 paintings by Berthe Morisot were removed. In 1985, a sculpture by Camille Claudel. In 1986, 2 paintings by Mary Cassatt and 1 by Maria Castellano. The Castellano painting, that's the one that was supposedly stolen in the heist. Yes, it was called Summer Garden, a beautiful piece showing a woman reading under an apple tree. Castellano painted it in 1924. It was one of my favorite works in the collection. Ryan showed her a photograph of the painting he'd found in the factory. Is this it? Dr. Wells's eyes widened. My God, you found it. After all these years, you actually found it. She stared at the photograph, her eyes filling with tears. Where was it? Hidden, protected by someone who understood its value. May I ask who? A woman named Rosa Rodriguez. She used to work here as a cleaner. Dr. Wells gasped. Rosa? I remember her. She was wonderful, kind, hard-working. There was some scandal about her being let go. Hartley claimed she'd been stealing, but I never believed it. Rosa wasn't that kind of person. She wasn't stealing. She was trying to expose Hartley's crimes. And he destroyed her reputation to silence her. Dr. Wells shook her head. That's exactly the kind of man he was, ruthless when threatened. Ryan pulled out his notebook. I need to understand more about the art world in the 1980s. Why would Hartley target works by women specifically? Dr. Wells sat back in her chair. It's complicated. In the 1980s, the art market was booming, but it was also incredibly sexist. Works by male artists sold for millions, while comparable works by women sold for a fraction of that. Even brilliant artists like Maria Castellano were undervalued. So Hartley could steal them and sell them without attracting as much attention. Exactly. If a Picasso went missing, everyone would notice. But a Castellano? Back then, most people hadn't even heard of her. Hartley probably figured he could sell these paintings to private collectors, pocket the money, and nobody would care enough to investigate thoroughly. But Rosa cared. Rosa cared, Dr. Wells agreed, and thank God she did. Detective, do you know what Maria Castellano's paintings sell for now? I'm guessing more than they did in the 1980s. Much more. In 2019, one of her works sold at auction for $3 million. The art world has finally started to recognize how talented these women artists were, but for decades their work was dismissed and undervalued simply because of their gender. Ryan made notes furiously. Do you still have records? From the 1987 heist? The original police reports, insurance claims? In our archives, yes. I'll have my assistant pull everything for you. I'd also like a list of everyone who was on the museum's board of trustees in 1987, and any art dealers or collectors that Hartley worked with regularly. Dr. Wells nodded. I'll put that together. Detective, can I ask what you plan to do with this information? I'm going to build a case. A real one this time, not the whitewash that happened in 1987. Richard Hartley needs to answer for what he did. He's an old man now, probably in his 80s. Justice doesn't have an expiration date, Ryan said firmly. Over the next several days, Ryan followed the money trail. Financial records from the 1980s were harder to access than modern digital transactions, but with court orders and some help from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, he started to piece together the puzzle. Richard Hartley had indeed been living well beyond his museum director's salary. Luxury cars, expensive homes, trips to Europe, all funded by what appeared to be consulting fees from various art dealers and collectors. One name kept appearing in the financial records, Gerald Blackwood. The man Elena's grandmother had mentioned as Hartley's right-hand man. Ryan tracked Blackwood to an expensive retirement community in Connecticut. When he called to arrange an interview, Blackwood's lawyer answered instead. My client has no comment. On events from nearly 4 decades ago, the lawyer said smoothly. I haven't even told you what events I want to discuss, Ryan pointed out. It doesn't matter. Mr. Blackwood is elderly and in poor health. He will not be giving any statements to law enforcement, even if it means he could face charges for art fraud and conspiracy. There was a pause. I'll need to consult with my client. 2 days later, Ryan's phone rang. It was Blackwood's lawyer again. Mr. Blackwood is willing to speak with you, but only if you agree that anything he says cannot be used directly against him in court. He wants immunity. Ryan's pulse quickened. He wants to make a deal. My client is an old man with health problems. He doesn't want to spend his final years fighting legal battles. If you can guarantee immunity, he'll tell you everything about Richard Hartley's operation. Ryan immediately contacted the district attorney. After several tense meetings and negotiations, they agreed. If Blackwood's information led to charges against Hartley and others, he would receive immunity for his cooperation. The interview took place in Blackwood's condo, with his lawyer present. Blackwood was 81 years old, frail and using a walker, but his mind was sharp. "I've been waiting for this day for 30 years, Blackwood said as Ryan set up his recorder. "Every time I read about some new art scandal, I wondered if someone would finally connect the dots to Hartley. Tell me about your relationship with Richard Hartley." Blackwood sighed. "I was an art dealer in the 1970s and 80s, legitimate at first. But the money in the private art market was incredible, and Richard had access to museum-quality pieces. He approached me in 1981 with a proposition. He'd provide paintings, I'd find wealthy buyers who wouldn't ask too many questions. You sold stolen art." I told myself it wasn't really stealing. These paintings were sitting in storage, not being displayed. We were finding them good homes with people who appreciated them. That's how I rationalized it anyway. "How many paintings did you sell for Hartley?" "Over the years? 23, maybe 24. I lost count." Ryan felt sick. "And the 1987 heist?" "That was Richard's idea. The museum's board was starting to ask questions about missing inventory. Richard needed a cover story, something big enough to explain multiple missing paintings at once, so he staged a robbery." "Who were the actual thieves?" "Dennis Walsh, the security guard, and 2 guys Richard hired, muscle ex-cons who needed money. They came in, grabbed paintings that had already been replaced with forgeries, and left. Dennis claimed he'd been knocked unconscious. The investigation was a joke because Richard had friends in the police department." "What about the Maria Castellano painting? The one that was never recovered?" Blackwood's expression changed. "That one got away from us. Richard was furious. He'd already lined up a buyer in Switzerland, a wealthy collector who specifically wanted works by undervalued women artists. But the painting disappeared the night before the heist." "Did you ever find out what happened to it?" "We suspected that cleaning lady, Rosa something. Richard had fired her a few months earlier, and we thought maybe she took it as revenge. But we could never prove it, and we couldn't exactly report it without incriminating ourselves." "Did Hartley try to find her? Threaten her?" Blackwood looked away. "I don't know the details. Richard handled that side of things. I just sold the paintings." Ryan left the interview with hours of recorded testimony. Part 5. The conspiracy unfolds. 3 weeks into the investigation, Ryan sat in the conference room with FBI Special Agent Victoria Lynn and Assistant District Attorney Thomas Brennan. Spread across the table were documents, photographs, and evidence that painted a damning picture of corruption that had lasted for decades. "This is bigger than we initially thought," Agent Lynn said, pointing to a chart Ryan had created showing connections between Hartley, various art dealers, wealthy collectors, and even several police officers who'd worked the original 1987 case. This wasn't just one corrupt museum director. This was an organized network. Thomas Brennan, a seasoned prosecutor with 20 years of experience, shook his head in amazement. "I've seen a lot of fraud cases, but this is extraordinary. The sheer audacity of it, staging a museum heist to cover up years of theft. What's our strongest evidence?" Agent Lynn asked. Ryan organized the materials. "We have Rosa Rodriguez's journal with detailed documentation of dates, conversations, and transactions. We have the Castellano painting itself as physical evidence. We have Gerald Blackwood's testimony, which a defense lawyer will tear apart because we gave him immunity," Brennan interrupted. "True, but we also have the financial records. Bank transfers, property purchases, luxury items that Hartley couldn't afford on his museum salary. The numbers tell the story." Agent Lynn pulled up a laptop and showed them what her team had discovered. "We've traced some of those paintings. 4 of them are currently hanging in private collections. The owners claim they purchased them legitimately, but the paperwork doesn't hold up to scrutiny. These are paintings that were supposed to have been stolen and never recovered. Can we seize them? Ryan asked. We're working on warrants now. But here's where it gets complicated. Some of these collectors are very wealthy and very connected. We're talking about CEOs, politicians, even a former ambassador. Brennan grimaced. Which means we're going to face serious pushback. These people can afford the best lawyers in the country. We expected that, Ryan said. But we can't let it stop us. This isn't just about one stolen painting anymore. This is about holding powerful people accountable. Agent Lin nodded. Agreed, but we need to be strategic. Ryan, you mentioned that Rosa's journal referenced specific board members who helped Hartley cover up the theft. What did you find out about them? Ryan pulled out another file. That's where things get really interesting. In 1987, there were 9 members on the Westfield Museum's Board of Trustees. 3 of them are dead, but 6 are still alive, and, of those 6, 4 went on to have very successful careers. 1 became a senator. Another is now a federal judge. The 3rd is CEO of a major investment firm. The room fell silent. You're saying we might need to investigate a sitting senator? Brennan asked quietly. I'm saying we need to follow the evidence wherever it leads, Ryan replied. Look, I know this is explosive, but according to Rosa's journal, these board members weren't passive bystanders. They actively helped Hartley suppress the investigation. They pressured the police, they dismissed Rosa's complaints, and they vouched for the forgeries as authentic. Agent Lin pulled up photographs of the board members from 1987. Okay, let's go through them one by one. Who's the senator? Jonathan Westbrook. He was 32 in 1987, youngest person on the board. Came from old money, his family had donated millions to the museum. And Rosa's journal mentions him specifically? Ryan read from his notes. Rosa writes that in March 1987, when she tried to report her concerns about Hartley, Westbrook laughed at her. He told her that she should be grateful to have a job cleaning toilets and shouldn't make up stories about her betters. That's not proof of criminal conspiracy, though, Brennan pointed out. No, but there's more. A week after Rosa was fired, she received a phone call at home. The caller didn't identify himself, but Rosa recognized the voice. It was Westbrook. He told her that if she continued spreading lies about the museum, she'd regret it. She'd lose her other job, her home, maybe even her children. Agent Lin's expression hardened. He threatened her children? Rosa was terrified. She stopped trying to report the theft through official channels. That's when she decided to hide the painting and wait. They spent the next hour reviewing each board member's involvement. The pattern was clear. Hartley hadn't acted alone. He'd had support from the wealthy and powerful, people who benefited from the art world's corruption and who used their influence to protect him. What I don't understand, Brennan said, is why they helped him. What did they get out of it? Ryan had been wondering the same thing. The answer came when Agent Lin's team dug deeper into the financial connections. First option buying rights, Agent Lin explained, showing them documents from a private art dealer. Hartley would alert certain board members before he sold a stolen painting. They got the first chance to buy it at below market prices. Then they'd wait a few years and sell it for enormous profits. So they were profiting from the theft, Ryan said. Exactly. And there's more. Several of the board members had personal art collections that increased dramatically in value during the 1980s. We've started analyzing those collections, and some of the paintings look suspicious. Brennan leaned back in his chair. This is going to be a nightmare to prosecute. These people have been respected pillars of society for 40 years. Their lawyers will argue that any evidence is too old, that memories are unreliable, that documents could be forgeries. But we have Rosa's contemporary documentation, Ryan argued. She wrote everything down as it happened, and we have the painting itself. That's not a memory, that's physical evidence, which Hartley's lawyers will claim Rosa stole, Brennan countered. They'll paint her as a disgruntled employee who stole the painting and then fabricated evidence to justify her theft. Ryan felt his frustration rising. So what are you saying? We just give up? I'm saying we need to be realistic about our chances. But I'm also saying... Brennan paused, a determined look crossing his face. I'm also saying that sometimes you take on a difficult case because it's the right thing to do. My grandfather was a factory worker. He would have loved Rosa Rodriguez. So yes, we move forward, but we do it smart. Over the next week, the investigation expanded. Agent Lin's team conducted interviews with former museum employees, art dealers, and anyone who'd had contact with Hartley in the 1980s. Some people were helpful. Others suddenly couldn't remember anything. Ryan received his first threatening phone call on a Tuesday evening. The voice was disguised, robotic. "Detective Cooper, you're playing a dangerous game. Some investigations are better left alone. Think about your career. Think about your family." Ryan traced the call, but it came from a burner phone. No way to identify the caller. 2 days later, Elena called him, her voice shaking. "Detective, someone broke into my apartment." Ryan rushed to her place. The apartment had been searched thoroughly. Drawers emptied, cushions sliced open, papers scattered everywhere. "Did they take anything?" he asked. Elena looked around. "My laptop is gone. And, oh no, some of my grandmother's personal items. Photographs, letters, anything related to the case." "I don't think so. I gave you all the important evidence. But detective, whoever did this knew what they were looking for. This wasn't a random burglary. Ryan called in the crime scene team, but he already knew what they'd find. Nothing. Whoever had done this was professional." That night, Ryan sat in his car outside Elena's apartment, making sure she was safe. His phone rang. It was Agent Lynn. "Ryan, we have a problem. Someone leaked information about our investigation to the press. There's going to be a story in tomorrow's newspaper about the Westfield Museum case being reopened." Ryan cursed. "How did they find out?" "I don't know, but this changes everything. Once this goes public, Hartley and his associates are going to lawyer up and stop talking. Any chance we had of getting cooperation is gone." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," Ryan said slowly. "Maybe it's time this came out into the open. Rosa spent 40 years in the shadows, afraid to speak. Maybe it's time the truth saw sunlight. That's a nice sentiment, but it's going to make our jobs much harder." "I know. But Agent Lynn, think about it. The more public this gets, the harder it will be for powerful people to make it disappear. They can threaten me. They can break into Elena's apartment, but they can't silence the entire press corps." The next morning, the story broke. "Museum heist reopened. Allegations of decades-long art fraud," read the headline. The article didn't have all the details, but it had enough. Richard Hartley's name was prominent, as were hints about respected community leaders possibly being involved. Ryan's phone started ringing off the hook. Reporters, other police departments with similar cases, former museum employees wanting to share their own stories about Hartley. It was chaos, but it was also validation. At noon, Ryan's captain called him into his office. "Cooper, I just got off the phone with the mayor. He's getting pressure from some very important people to shut down this investigation." Ryan's heart sank. And his captain smiled. "I told him that if he wants this investigation stopped, he'll need to get a court order. Until then, we follow the evidence. But Ryan, watch your back. You've poked a hornet's nest, and those hornets have a lot of sting." That evening, Ryan met with Elena at a safe location. She looked tired but determined. Part 3. Elena's account. Ryan spent the next 2 days diving deep into Elena's grandmother's journal. He sat at his desk, surrounded by photocopies of old newspaper articles, museum records, and police reports from 1987. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. Rosa Rodriguez had been meticulous in her documentation. She'd written down dates, times, conversations she'd overheard. She'd even managed to photograph some documents when she'd worked late shifts cleaning the museum offices, a second job she'd taken to make ends meet. On the third day, Ryan returned to the hospital. Elena looked much stronger now. The color had returned to her face, and she was sitting up in bed, sketching in a notepad. "You're an artist," Ryan observed, pulling up a chair. Elena smiled. "Runs in the family, I guess. My grandmother never had formal training, but she could draw beautifully. She used to sketch the patterns for fabrics at the factory." "I read her journal," Ryan said, "cover to cover. Elena, your grandmother was incredibly brave. Tell me what you found." Ryan opened his briefcase and pulled out a timeline he'd created. "Okay, so here's what I've pieced together. In 1985, your grandmother started working a second job at the Westfield Museum, just cleaning, emptying trash cans, mopping floors. But Rosa was observant. She always noticed everything," Elena said softly. "She started noticing things that didn't add up, paintings being moved around, the director, Richard Hartley, meeting with art dealers late at night, shipping crates being loaded into trucks with no documentation. She told me once that silence isn't always golden," Elena said. Sometimes silence is just fear wearing a mask, Ryan continued. In July of 1986, Rosa found something in Hartley's trash. A torn-up invoice showing a private sale of a painting that was supposed to still be in the museum's collection. She put the pieces back together and kept it. That was the first piece of evidence. And she started keeping a record of everything after that. Exactly. Over the next year, she documented at least 8 paintings that Hartley had secretly sold. He was replacing them with very good forgeries, good enough that most people wouldn't notice. But Rosa had been looking at these paintings every night for years. She could tell. Elena leaned forward. What did she do with that information? She tried to report it. According to her journal, in March of 1987, she went to the museum's board of trustees. But Hartley had friends on the board. They dismissed her concerns, said she was mistaken. One of them even suggested she might be the one stealing, trying to cover her tracks by accusing the director. They tried to blame her. Elena's voice rose in anger. They did more than try.
Hartley had her fired from her museum job.
Claimed she was unreliable, that money had gone missing from the petty cash. Your grandmother was devastated, but she kept working at the textile factory and she kept gathering evidence. Ryan pulled out another document. Then came October 15, 1987, the heist. According to the official police report, thieves broke in through a basement window, bypassed the security system, and stole 12 paintings. The security guard on duty said he'd been knocked unconscious and didn't see anything, but that's not what really happened. No, your grandmother's journal tells a different story. She writes that 3 days before the heist, she saw Hartley meeting with 2 men in the museum's parking lot after hours. She took photos. Ryan showed Elena grainy photographs of 3 men standing next to a car. She recognized one of them as the security guard, Dennis Walsh. So it was an inside job. Absolutely. Hartley staged the whole thing. He reported 12 paintings stolen, but in reality, he'd already sold most of them over the previous 2 years. The heist was just a way to explain their disappearance and collect insurance money. Elena shook her head in disbelief. And he got away with it. For the most part, yes. Over the next few years, 11 of the 12 paintings were mysteriously recovered. They showed up in unusual places. Abandoned warehouses, storage lockers, even one in a dumpster. All of them were forgeries that Hartley had commissioned. But he couldn't find the 12th painting because my grandmother had it? Ryan nodded. The Maria Castellano painting. According to Rosa's journal, she went to the museum the night before the staged heist. She knew something was about to happen. She took the Castellano painting to protect it because she knew it was Hartley's next target. Why that one specifically? Maria Castellano was one of the few women artists in the museum's collection. Hartley had been systematically removing works by women artists because he thought they were undervalued and wouldn't be missed. Your grandmother writes in her journal that the Castellano was beautiful and deserved to be seen, not sold off to some private collector who'd keep it in a vault. Elena wiped tears from her eyes. That sounds exactly like something my grandmother would say. She always fought for the underdog, for people who didn't have a voice. After the heist, Rosa went into hiding with the painting. She knew if Hartley discovered she had it, her life would be in danger. She created that secret room in the textile factory where she still worked. Her boss, Mr. Morrison, was a kind man who trusted her. She told him she needed a private place to store some family heirlooms, and he let her use that corner of the basement. Did Mr. Morrison know about the painting? I don't think so. According to property records, the factory closed in 2010, 5 years before Mr. Morrison passed away. Rosa kept paying a small rent to the property management company to maintain access to that room, even after the factory shut down. Elena looked amazed. She kept that secret for nearly 40 years, and she documented everything. This journal isn't just a personal diary, it's evidence. She has names, dates, financial records, everything we'd need to prove what Hartley did. So why didn't she ever come forward? Ryan sighed. Fear, and not just for herself. Your grandmother had a family, children, grandchildren. She writes about receiving threatening phone calls in the months after the heist. Someone knew she'd been asking questions. She decided the painting would be safer hidden and she'd wait for the right time. And she chose me to finish it. You were an artist yourself. She knew you'd understand the value of what she was protecting, and she waited until Hartley was old and his influence had faded. Elena looked out the hospital window. Detective, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I haven't mentioned yet. Ryan pulled out his notebook. I'm listening. When I was trapped in that room, I had a lot of time to read through everything my grandmother left. The journal, yes, but also letters she'd written but never sent. One of them was addressed to me. What did it say? She apologized. She said she was sorry for putting this burden on me. But she couldn't die knowing the truth would die with her. She wrote that art isn't just paint on canvas. It's history, it's culture, it's the voices of people who came before us. When someone like Hartley steals art, he's not just stealing an object. He's stealing part of our shared human story. Ryan felt a lump in his throat. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She also warned me. She said that when the truth comes out, powerful people will try to stop it. She said they'll lie, they'll threaten, they'll try to discredit anyone who speaks up. But she said the truth is stronger than fear, and someone had to be brave enough to stand up. Are you scared, Elena? She met his eyes directly. Terrified. But I'm not going to back down. My grandmother didn't, and neither will I. Ryan closed his notebook. Okay, then here's what we're going to do. I'm going to take this evidence to my captain. We'll need to involve the FBI's Art Crime Division, because this crosses state lines and involves federal offenses. It's going to take time to build a case that will stand up in court. How much time? Weeks, maybe months. We need to verify everything, track down other witnesses, build an airtight case. Hartley has money and lawyers. We need to be absolutely certain before we move, Elena nodded. I understand. But detective, please hurry. The longer this takes, the more time Hartley has to destroy evidence or intimidate witnesses. I know. I'm going to move as fast as I can. Ryan stood up to leave, then turned back. Elena, one more question. In all your grandmother's notes, did she mention anyone else? Anyone who might have helped Hartley or who might know more about what happened? Elena thought for a moment. There were names mentioned, board members, art dealers, but one name appeared more than the others. Gerald Blackwood. She wrote that he was Hartley's right-hand man, the person who actually arranged the private sales. Ryan wrote down the name. I'll look into him. Get some rest, Elena, and be careful. If someone figures out what you found, you might still be in danger. As Ryan left the hospital, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about solving an old crime anymore. This was about justice for a brave woman who'd spent her life protecting a truth that desperately needed to be told. Part 7. The Truth Revealed. The meeting with the police chief was scheduled for 8 a.m., but Ryan arrived at 7 to prepare. He found Agent Lynn already in the conference room surrounded by documents. You couldn't sleep either, she asked. Not after that call from my captain. Ryan sat down heavily. They're going to try to shut us down. Maybe, but I've been working on something. Agent Lynn spread out several papers. Remember how the Castellano painting was stolen from our evidence room? Well, before it was logged in, I took something that might be even more valuable. What? High-resolution photographs. Front back every inch of that painting, and I sent samples of the paint to the FBI lab for analysis before anyone knew we had it. Ryan felt hope stirring. That's evidence we can still use. Better than that. The lab results came back this morning. The paint composition matches perfectly with other known works by Maria Castellano from 1924. This isn't a forgery. It's the real painting. Which means everything Rosa claimed about hiding it is true. Hartley's lawyers will still argue we can't prove it's the stolen painting from the museum. Actually, we can. Agent Lynn pulled up more documents. I contacted the Westfield Museum's Conservation Department. In 1982, 5 years before the heist, they did routine maintenance on the Castellano painting. Part of that maintenance involved placing a tiny identification marker on the back of the canvas. Invisible to the naked eye, but detectable under UV light. And? The marker is there. It matches the museum's records exactly. This is the stolen painting. We can prove it. Before Ryan could respond, his captain appeared at the door. Cooper, Lynn, they're ready for you. The police chief's office was intimidating by design. Dark wood paneling, photos of him with various politicians and dignitaries, awards and commendations covering the walls. Chief Harold Morrison sat behind his massive desk, and next to him was someone Ryan didn't expect. District Attorney Catherine Price, the highest-ranking prosecutor in the county. Detective Cooper. Agent Lynn, please sit, the chief said. Ryan and Agent Lynn sat down, and Ryan noticed his captain standing by the door, arms crossed, expression unreadable. I'll get right to the point, Chief Morrison said. Your investigation into Richard Hartley and the 1987 museum heist has generated significant controversy. I've received calls from several city council members, the mayor, and even a senator's office, all expressing concerns about the direction of this case. Concerns about justice being served? Ryan asked, unable to keep the edge out of his voice. The chief's eyes hardened. Watch your tone, detective. I brought you in here to discuss the viability of this case, not to be lectured about justice. District Attorney Price spoke up. Detective Cooper, Agent Lynn, I've reviewed all the evidence you've compiled. While I commend your thorough investigation, I have serious concerns about our ability to prosecute this case successfully. With respect, ma'am, we have substantial evidence, Agent Lynn said. Rosa Rodriguez's journal, financial records, testimony from Gerald Blackwood. You have the journal of a deceased woman who was fired from her job 40 years ago. You have financial records that can be interpreted multiple ways, and you have testimony from a man you had to give immunity to in exchange for his cooperation. Price shook her head. Any defense attorney worth their fee will shred this case. What about the painting? Ryan asked. We can prove it's the stolen Castellano from the museum, which was found in a location that Rosa Rodriguez had access to. Hartley's lawyers will argue that she stole it, not that he did. Ryan felt his frustration building. So we just let him get away with it? Let all of them get away with it? Chief Morrison leaned forward. Detective, nobody is saying Hartley is innocent. But we have to be realistic about what we can prove in court. This case is nearly 4 decades old. Most of the principals are elderly or dead. The physical evidence was stolen from our own evidence room, which raises questions about our ability to maintain chain of custody. The evidence was stolen because someone inside this building helped them, Ryan said. Doesn't that tell you how powerful these people are? Doesn't that make you want to fight harder, not give up? The room fell silent. Then District Attorney Price surprised everyone. Actually, Detective Cooper has a point. She opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Chief Morrison asked me here to recommend closing this case. But after reviewing everything last night, I've changed my mind. The chief looked shocked. Catherine, hear me out. Yes, this case is difficult. Yes, we'll face powerful opposition. But I've spent 20 years as a prosecutor and I've learned something important. The cases worth fighting for are never easy. If we close this investigation because we're afraid of who we might offend, what message does that send? It sends the message that we're pragmatic, the chief said. It sends the message that justice is only for people who don't have powerful friends, Price countered. And I didn't become a prosecutor to deliver that kind of justice. Ryan felt a surge of gratitude toward this woman he'd never met before. Price continued. Now I agree our case has weaknesses, so we fix them. We build it stronger. Detective Cooper, Agent Lynn, you've done excellent preliminary work, but we need more. We need to find corroborating witnesses, other people who worked at the museum, other art dealers who knew what Hartley was doing. We've been trying, Agent Lynn said. Most people are too scared to talk. Then we offer protection. We make it clear that anyone who comes forward will be kept safe. We also need to follow up on those board members. If we can flip even one of them, get them to testify against the others, our case becomes much stronger. Chief Morrison looked unhappy but nodded slowly. You're the DA. If you want to move forward, I won't stop you. But I'm going to document that I advised against it. Documented and noted, Price said. Now let's talk about next steps. Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation took on new life. With District Attorney Price's support, they obtained warrants to examine the financial records of several board members from 1987. They found a pattern of suspicious art purchases and sales that coincided. With the museum thefts, they also found something unexpected. One of the board members, a woman named Helen Brightman, who was now 78, reached out through her lawyer. She wanted to talk. Ryan and Agent Lynn met with Helen in a quiet office downtown. She was a small woman with white hair and tired eyes. I've been carrying this guilt for 38 years, Helen said softly. When I saw the news about your investigation, I knew it was time to tell the truth. What truth, Ms. Brightman? Agent Lynn asked gently. I knew what Richard Hartley was doing. I knew he was stealing from the museum, and I did nothing to stop it. Ryan took notes as Helen explained. She joined the board in 1985. Excited to be part of the museum's leadership, but she quickly realized that Hartley and several other board members were using their positions for personal profit. I was younger than the others, and a woman in a male-dominated board. When I raised concerns, I was dismissed. They told me I didn't understand how the art world worked. When that cleaning lady Rosa came forward with accusations, I wanted to support her, but the others shut her down so quickly, so completely, that I was afraid to speak up. Why are you speaking up now? Ryan asked. Because I'm old, detective. I'll probably be dead in a few years. I don't want to die knowing I let those men get away with what they did. And I don't want Rosa Rodriguez's bravery to be forgotten. Helen provided details about board meetings where Hartley's activities were discussed and covered up. She had kept her own notes from those meetings, thinking someday she might need them. Will you testify in court? Agent Lynn asked. Helen nodded. Yes, I'm ready to face whatever comes. With Helen's testimony and documentation, the case transformed. They now had an insider witness who could describe the conspiracy firsthand. Combined with Rosa's journal and the physical evidence, they finally had enough for formal charges. District Attorney Price held a press conference announcing that Richard Hartley would be charged with theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Several former board members would also face charges. The news exploded across media outlets. Some praised the prosecution for pursuing justice regardless of the defendant's power and status. Others claimed it was a political witch hunt against elderly, respected citizens. Senator Westbrook held his own press conference, denying any wrongdoing and calling the charges a desperate attempt to destroy innocent people's reputations. But public opinion was shifting. Other victims began coming forward. Former museum employees who'd been fired or silenced, artists whose work had been stolen or undervalued, collectors who'd unknowingly purchased stolen paintings. Ryan received a call from Dr. Patricia Wells at the Westfield Museum. Detective, I've been going through our archives more thoroughly. I found something you need to see. At the museum, Dr. Wells showed him a box of old videotapes. In the 1980s, the museum installed security cameras. Most of the footage was recorded over, but I found tapes from the week before the heist that were never erased. They were mislabeled and stored in the wrong location. Ryan's heart raced. Have you watched them? I have. And detective, you can see Hartley and two other men moving paintings out of the museum 3 days before the reported heist. They're not being stolen. They're being removed by the director himself. Part 6. Dangerous Attention. The story hit national news within 48 hours. What started as a local investigation into an old museum heist suddenly became a conversation about corruption, justice, and the art world's dark secrets. Ryan found himself at the center of a media storm he hadn't anticipated. On Monday morning, Ryan arrived at the precinct to find 3 news vans parked outside. Reporters shouted questions as he walked past, but he kept his head down and said nothing. His captain had been clear, no interviews until they had solid charges filed. Inside, his desk phone was already ringing. He ignored it and headed straight for the conference room where Agent Lynn was waiting with her team. We have developments, she said, pulling up security footage on a laptop. This was taken from Elena Rodriguez's apartment building 2 nights ago, the night of the break-in. The grainy footage showed 2 men in dark clothing entering the building. They wore baseball caps pulled low and kept their faces away from the camera. Can you identify them? Ryan asked. Not yet. But look at this. Agent Lynn forwarded the video. They were in her apartment for exactly 17 minutes. Then they left with a laptop bag and a small box. Very professional, very precise. They knew exactly what they were looking for, which means someone told them. Someone who knew Elena had materials related to the case. Ryan's mind raced. We need to figure out who leaked information about our investigation. Already working on it, Agent Lynn said. But Ryan, there's something else. This morning I received a very interesting phone call from a lawyer representing Richard Hartley. What did he want? To make a deal? Hartley wants to meet with us, but only under specific conditions. No recording devices, no formal statements off the record. He claims he has information that could help our investigation. Ryan was immediately suspicious. It's a trap. He's trying to figure out what we know. Probably. But what if he actually does have useful information? What if he wants to flip on the board members who protected him? Brennan, who'd just arrived, shook his head. Don't trust it. Hartley's had 40 years to perfect his lies. Whatever he tells you will be carefully designed to protect himself and his assets. But we still have to hear him out, Agent Lynn said. If we refuse to meet, his lawyers will claim we weren't interested in the truth, only in persecution. They decided Ryan and Agent Lynn would meet with Hartley, but with strict ground rules. The meeting would be documented, even if not recorded. Anything Hartley said could potentially be used against him. 3 days later, Ryan and Agent Lynn sat in a conference room at one of the city's most expensive law firms. The room was all glass and steel, with a view of the city skyline that probably cost more than Ryan made in a year. Richard Hartley arrived with 3 lawyers. He was 84 years old now, but he still carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd spent a lifetime believing rules didn't apply to him. His suit probably cost more than Ryan's car. "Detective Cooper, Agent Lynn," Hartley said, his voice smooth and cultured. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." "Let's skip the pleasantries," Ryan said. "Your lawyer said you had information for us." Hartley smiled thinly. "Direct, I appreciate that very well. I'm here to tell you that you're wasting your time investigating me. The 1987 heist was thoroughly investigated at the time. The case was closed. Whatever Rosa Rodriguez claimed in her journal is the fantasy of a disgruntled former employee. That's not information. That's a defense statement," Agent Lynn said. "I'm getting to the information," Hartley replied. "You see, I know what you're really after. You think I stole paintings from the museum and sold them illegally. You think I staged the heist to cover my tracks, and you think various board members helped me? Did they?" Ryan asked. Hartley laughed. "You're asking me to incriminate myself. My lawyers would never allow that. But I will tell you this, the art world in the 1980s was very different from today. Things were done differently. What might seem improper now was standard practice then." "Theft was never standard practice," Agent Lynn said coldly. "Theft is such an ugly word. Let's call it strategic reallocation of undervalued assets." Ryan felt his anger rising. This man had destroyed Rosa's life, had threatened her family, and now he sat here making jokes. "We have evidence," Ryan said. "Rosa's journal, financial records, testimony from your associate, Gerald Blackwood. And we have the Castellano painting, the physical proof that you're a thief." For the first time, Hartley's expression flickered. "Ah yes, the painting. You know, I always wondered what happened to that piece. It was supposed to be part of the heist, but it vanished. Cost me a significant amount of money when I couldn't deliver it to my buyer." "You're admitting you had a buyer lined up for stolen property?" One of Hartley's lawyers jumped in. "My client admits nothing. He's speaking hypothetically." Hartley waved his hand dismissively. "Let me tell you why you'll never win this case, detective. First, most of the people involved are dead. Second, any evidence from 40 years ago is questionable at best. Third, and this is most important, some of the people who might be implicated by your investigation are very powerful. They don't want their names dragged through the mud over something that happened decades ago." "Is that a threat?" Ryan asked. "It's a reality check. You're a detective. You have a pension, a family probably. Agent Lynn, you have a promising career with the FBI. Why risk all that for a case you can't win?" Agent Lynn leaned forward. "Because unlike you, we actually care about justice." Hartley's smile faded. "Justice is a luxury for people who can afford it. Rosa Rodriguez couldn't afford it. That's why she hid in the shadows for 40 years. That's why she never came forward with her accusations. She knew how the world really works. She came forward through her granddaughter," Ryan said, "and we're going to finish what she started." "Are you?" Hartley stood up. "We'll see. But before I leave, let me give you one piece of actual information. You've been investigating Senator Westbrook, haven't you? Asking questions about his involvement with the museum board in 1987? Ryan and Agent Lynn exchanged glances but said nothing. "The senator is very aware of your investigation, and he's not happy. Yesterday he had lunch with the director of the FBI. Your director, Agent Lynn. I wonder what they talked about." After Hartley left, Ryan and Agent Lynn sat in silence. "He's trying to intimidate us," Agent Lynn finally said. "Is it working?" She smiled grimly. "Hell no. But we need to be smart about this. If Westbrook is applying pressure through official channels, we need to document everything. Every conversation, every decision, every roadblock we encounter." They returned to the precinct to find more bad news waiting. Ryan's car, parked in the secure lot, had been vandalized. All 4 tires slashed, windows smashed, and someone had spray-painted "Drop It" across the hood in red paint. "This is escalating," Agent Lynn said, surveying the damage. Ryan was shaking with anger. "They think they can scare me into backing off. They're wrong." But the attacks didn't stop. 2 days later, someone broke into the evidence room at the precinct. The Castellano painting was gone. Ryan felt like he'd been punched in the gut. That painting was their strongest physical evidence. Without it, they had Rosa's journal and Blackwood's testimony, but Hartley's lawyers could dismiss both as unreliable. How did they get past security? Ryan demanded. The evidence room supervisor looked sick. I don't know. The security footage from last night is corrupted. The logs show no unauthorized access. It's like the painting just disappeared. Agent Lynn pulled Ryan aside. This was an inside job. Someone in this building helped them. You're saying we have a dirty cop? I'm saying someone very powerful wants this case to go away and they're willing to do whatever it takes. Elena called Ryan that afternoon, her voice frantic. Detective, I just received an envelope at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a photograph of me walking to my car yesterday and a note that said, your grandmother should have kept her mouth shut. Where are you now? Ryan asked urgently. At home, but I'm scared. What if they unpack a bag? I'm coming to get you. You're not safe there anymore. Ryan arranged for Elena to stay at a safe house, a police-protected location used for witnesses in danger. As he drove her there, she stared out the window in silence. I'm sorry, Ryan said. I never thought it would get this dangerous. It's not your fault, Elena replied. My grandmother knew this would be hard. She wrote in one of her letters that powerful people never give up power without a fight. She said they'd try to scare us to make us give up. But she also said that giving up means they win. Means her sacrifice was for nothing. Your grandmother was brave. So are you, detective? So am I. We're going to see this through no matter what. But even as Elena said those words, Ryan wondered if they were strong enough to win against people who had unlimited money, power, and connections. People who could steal evidence from a police station, who could threaten witnesses, who could make problems disappear. That night, Ryan got another call. This time it was his captain. Cooper, I need you in my office first thing tomorrow morning. The chief wants to talk to you about the Hartley investigation. Why? His captain's voice was heavy. Because pressure is coming from very high up. They want us to consider closing the case. Ryan felt his world tilting. We can't close it. We're so close to...